So Avista and Hydro One announced this proposed merger in July of 2017. And it was just a done deal. It was going to happen, right? The big fish from Canada was going to eat the little fish from Spokane, and we were just going to send our power bills to Toronto. Or, well, I guess it's still going to be Spokane, but they were going to be owned wholly by this company out of Toronto, Hydro One. And nobody really knew what that was. They just knew that this thing had been proposed. Well, Hydro One, which is until about 4 years ago, a Canadian Crown Corporation, meaning it is a Canadian government entity. It was not a private company. But this entity and Avista needed to get approval from at least 10 different governmental entities. 5 of them in Washington, D.C., which they got, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the other alphabet soup agencies and committees. And then the 5 states that Avista at least provided some service in: Montana, Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Alaska, just a small piece, Juneau, a subsidiary of Avista, approved it. Montana, a very small part, they approved it. So then it was down to Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. And they started the process in Idaho in the Public Utilities Commission, because the Public Utilities Commission has to approve a merger. Same for Washington and Oregon. And there was a deadline for folks to get involved. And the only ones that knew to get involved were the ones that hang around the PUC all the time, because they deal with rate-making cases for Avista or whatever. So the regular parties that you would expect to go in that case showed up. Some of the established large industrial customers, they intervened. By the spring of 2018, before the hearings were even held out here, everybody settled. All of those groups cut a deal. Hydro One, Avista cut a deal with them. They got settlements. They got the things that they wanted and needed. So by the time that the public hearings were held in Moscow, in Sandpoint, in Coeur d'Alene, all of the parties in the Idaho PUC, and there were several of them, conservation groups and industrial customers and others, had already signed a settlement agreement with the PUC staff and Avista and Hydro One. It was a done deal. So we met up here, we talked about it, and said, you know, it's not hard to form a unincorporated nonprofit association. What's required to form an unincorporated nonprofit association in the state of Idaho?
Piece of paper.
Less than that. Art's on the right track though. 2 people or more sharing the same idea. That's it. No formal documents, no papers, no nothing. Well, we had more than 2 people that met in the back of that restaurant in Coeur d'Alene right before the hearing. We all showed up at the hearing, and by God, the issues that were raised at that hearing were the same issues that came up in front of the Idaho Public Utilities Commission later in the year. So after that public hearing, that was in the spring, everybody went back to their corners. We decided we were going to file a very late petition to intervene. The deadline had long since passed. There had already been a settlement entered by all the parties. How are we going to get into this case? Well, we filed a motion, a petition to intervene. Hydro One and Avista did not oppose it. They raised concerns and questions about who we were and whether we were legitimate and what was this Avista customer group and why weren't there incorporation documents in the Secretary of State's website, but they didn't actually oppose it. So when it came up to the PUC during their decision meeting, they went ahead and granted it. Now that was the very same day that it was announced that the new premier in Ontario had sacked the CEO of Hydro One and the board of Hydro One. And everybody started scratching their heads. Let's see, I mean, I don't know what company is similar size to Hydro One in the United States, but it's a big company. This was going to be a $5.3 billion American dollar acquisition of Avista. A big deal. And the premier, the equivalent of the governor of our state, or of 2 or 3 states together maybe, sacked a corporate CEO and board. That doesn't sound like that's a very independent, private corporate entity. That really caught everybody's attention. So the hearing that was going to be a pro forma hearing in front of the Public Utilities Commission in July, that we were given the courtesy of participating in so we could complain and whine and talk about how much more folks in Toronto were going to charge us than people in Spokane. That's pretty much all we were going to get to do. Show us the proof of why you need to charge that much. That hearing was vacated. It was thrown out. The PUC said, whoa, we need more time to figure out what is going on up in Canada and how they could just sack the CEO and the board. That's the entity that's going to be over Avista now. That sounds pretty unstable. It doesn't sound like private enterprise. So fast forward, Washington caught on to the same issue as Idaho. So Washington held a full-blown hearing. Idaho held a full-blown 2-day hearing where, again, all the other groups had settled with Hydro One and Avista. So here goes the CFO up on the stand from Toronto, very nice guy with a very French-Canadian accent. And, you know, he really didn't care about Gonzaga basketball. He wanted to talk about hockey, but that was okay. I made the questions friendly for him. And it became very clear over that day and a half of asking the Hydro One witnesses questions that they could not defend and just had to recognize the fact that their legislature, their parliament in Ontario can and did pass a bill that says, you Hydro One, you will come to us, the government, and we will tell you whether your new CEO salary is okay, whether it's too high or whether it's okay. By an agreement between the government of Ontario and Hydro One, which had been a quote-unquote private entity for 3 years at that point, at least 40% guaranteed of the company must be owned by the province, by the government of Ontario. At least 40%. At that time it was 47%. No entity and no person by law can own more than 10% of this supposedly private company. Well, this testimony went on, and the jaws of the 3 commissioners from Idaho kept going down lower and lower. They could not believe that this is the company that was proposing to take over Avista and that we should be okay with this. So the upshot of it was a concession that the province of Ontario has major influence and control over Hydro One, but it's a private company. And you can't stop one private company from another country from buying a smaller private company in the United States. There is a statute in Idaho, passed in 1951, and it was because a small governmental entity, a public utility district in Washington, was looking at acquiring some utility properties in North Idaho. And the legislature passed a law that said a state government cannot acquire assets of public utilities or of utilities in the state of Idaho, period. Does that law prohibit the Canadian company from coming in here? Their argument was no, because number one, it's a private company. And number two, that was only about a state government, and Ontario's not a state, it's a foreign country. So this was their argument. And they even had testimony, not somebody that was there in 1951, but somebody that testified as to what they thought that law meant. What we got out of after briefing, what we got out, and this was a major threshold issue, because you cannot allow this kind of acquisition to happen. So if the law applied, the deal couldn't go forward. If it didn't bar it, then they would look at, will it increase rates to allow the acquisition to happen, and is it in the public interest? We would have got to those issues, which, by the way, the public interest issue is the issue upon which the state of Washington denied the transfer. They didn't have the same kind of statute that we have. So the statute, if you read this 1951 statute, it's Idaho Code section 61-327. It's very detailed, it's very long, and it doesn't just say the utility assets and the company can't be acquired by a foreign government. It says, or a foreign government that's controlled by, and et cetera, long, long words. So our PUC found in the ruling that came out on January 2nd of this year that Hydro One is controlled by the province of Ontario, by a government. Most of the decisions that are of any import for that utility require a 2/3 vote. Well, 40% guaranteed, I'm not good at math, but that's a controlling minority. 40% can always decide whether certain things pass or not. We were prepared to go to the hearing and try to prove that these bad things might happen, that the government of Ontario might try to control Hydro One. But before we got to the hearing, it had already happened. The province of Ontario had already controlled Hydro One. They'd gotten rid of the CEO as a campaign promise, and the entire board as a campaign promise. And you know what else was a campaign promise? That the utility rates for Hydro One customers would go down 12%. Wouldn't it be nice if we could acquire a nice, wealthy, healthy little utility in the Northwest and spread some of our costs to those folks down in the States? We could even the rates and maybe lower it 12%. We asked the folks from Canada, from Hydro One, could that happen? Was very unlikely. Could the legislature in Ontario order that? Well, I suppose they could. They could pass a law, yeah? We don't see how we can stop them. That was the end of it. That was the end of the process. So it was very interesting process to go through for 2 days. It was very rewarding to see our 3 Idaho Public Utility Commissioners appointed by the governor, one of whom is from North Idaho, from Priest Lake area, and the other 2 recognized unanimously that we were the only ones making this argument, and we being the Avista customer group that you guys supported. We were the only ones that briefed it. We were the only ones that cross-examined any of the witnesses. The PUC staff did a little bit, but all those folks that had settled, they asked questions like, so, are we really going to get what we said we were going to get in the settlement? Okay, all right, we're okay with it. That's pretty much how their cross-examination went. So, and what was really interesting was after I was done with my cross-examination was to see the 3 commissioners repeat the theme and ask the questions themselves of the witnesses. Are you telling me that the province of Ontario and that legislature and that premier up there can actually affect what your company does? How often do you meet with them? How often do you talk to them? When was the last time you got a phone call from the premier? These things don't happen in the United States. We're not used to dealing with this with private utilities in the United States, but that is the way it worked up there. So the decision was that statute applied, and the transaction was barred as a matter of law under Idaho law, and we never even got to the criteria in 61.328 of will it raise costs and is it in the public interest. So thanks for your support in getting that done. So the footnote here is that Hydro One, by contract, when the deal was terminated January 23rd of this year, was required to pay a $103 million American dollars penalty to Hydro One was to Avista. So I haven't gotten a thank you call from Scott Morris yet, but I'm the president of Avista, but I'm waiting for it. So thanks.